in the next few minutes. I think what would be useful is perhaps when people are talking, if they can sort of say, everybody knows who they are, what they look like, if they can say which business they're from, and if it's not blindingly obvious, what kind of business you are. I think that would be useful. So yeah, I'll start off. I'm Adrian Field from Cardiff. Grateful for everyone's time today. We've sort of allocated an hour for this session for the professional and education sector. We've got officers from Cardiff Council and ARUP. ARUP going to do a little bit of a sort of slide thing to see where we are with the report at the moment, this safe recovery plan. What we're really interested in is making sure that the businesses are part of that process, really, and that we have input from the business community, the end users, to identify what issues you may have as facilities managers or owners or what have you, so that there's buy-in ultimately with this report, both for managing the public space, but also areas where there might be a sort of conflict between the actual premises themselves and the public areas, so entrances, smoking areas, that kind of thing. What's the impact on lunchtime, opening hours, that kind of thing, really. So that's probably enough from me. Ben, do you want to quickly introduce yourself and then go through
Adrian,
the chart?
Before we carry on, I just need to legally let everyone know that the meeting's being recorded, so you are on video and such like at the moment being recorded. But carry on. Sorry.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you. Forgot to mention that. So yeah, Ben, are you okay to go through where we are so far with the ARUP report?
Yeah, certainly. Good morning, all. Ben Pritchard from ARUP. I'm here to sort of run through some of the initial ideas and thinking that have gone into trying to get Cardiff back to being a welcoming city, to have people back into that city centre, and to try and use the city centre in a way that people understand, and do that in a way that is safe. So we've been asked to work with Cardiff Council, and we have specialists in background in urban design, transport and movement, psychology, and we're trying to bring those together. But a key part of that, of course, is understanding how that city functions and how it works. So what I've got a couple of colleagues. Jamie Tucker's been working with me, and Emma Pierce, also from ARUP, and we'll just take you through, I think it's about 10 slides just to give you a feel for what's going on, but we really wanted to get an understanding, from you about your ideas, some of the things you've been doing and working through, because that helps us to understand the city as kind of an ecosystem of what's taking place. And I think, very, if we go through this, and we're happy to come back to some slides if that's appropriate. And I think Jamie's going to give us a quick run through.
Great, thanks. Morning, everyone. It's Jamie Tucker here from ARUP. Can you all see the slide that's on the screen, first of all?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so the technology is working. Right. In the interest of giving you the most amount of time to ask questions and for us to give feedback, I'll go through this at a reasonable pace. So as Ben said, there'll be a chance to come back and ask specific questions on the slides. So first of all, if we just look at where our study area is, so it's probably what you all recognise as the city centre itself. So the red boundary is capturing everything that we're actually studying. I just want to quickly touch on something before we delve into the specifics of what we're looking at, because whilst we're looking at an immediate task, incredibly important, we've just got one eye on our future sort of vision for the city as well. So what we're looking at is potentially building blocks towards that. Now, I don't want you to be distracted by this, but just be aware that we are looking at that. And there's sort of two key things here. One is how the city might need to adapt in future in respect to climate change and resilience. So there's this idea of creating the city circle, which is the green circle, which is looking at sort of more green space potentially. More what we call living infrastructure, which helps with sort of flood resilience, but possibly more importantly in some respects is the city centre experience. So what we're going to find over time is that the need to go into the city centre will probably become less, but what we need to do is make sure that people want to come in. So that's about providing a first-class experience. So just sort of hold that thought for a second. This is, in terms of the immediate task at hand, this is how we're starting to approach it. So what we've done is remap the city centre really in terms of the street structure. So we're quite lucky in Cardiff in that there's almost like if you imagine it as a series of concentric circles. So the outer line of that is the roads that you might be familiar with, Boulevard de Nantes, for example. When you get inside the city sort of boundary, you've got a public transport loop. So the proposal is to sort of calm those, make those more pedestrian orientated. The inner ring then is the pedestrian streets, so Queen Street and the Hayes. And I'll talk through some of those specific proposals in a second. And obviously we've got the covered shopping areas, the Victorian Arcade and the St David Centre. So the initial idea is to try and create essentially a one-way pedestrian system to allow for social distancing, create a clear sort of movement network for people and allow it to be easily read. So a couple of things to pick up on this, and we'll go through again in a couple of slides, is to create sort of welcoming points. So you announce arrival at the city centre. So think of this almost like a sort of host city, or, you know, during an event where there's something on, where there's a clear sort of image for people in terms of what's changing when they arrive. More people are likely to arrive by bike, so we're cognizant of that. So there's a strategy in place to look at more expansive, safe bike parking areas, so they'd be spaced appropriately. And then where you've got this one-way system, what we're looking at is what we're calling sort of leapfrog points. So if you need to change direction, you can do so at certain points. So this is the sort of welcoming point idea. So as you arrive, there's a couple of things that we're looking at here. So there's a clear role for sort of people on the ground, representatives. We've referred to them as ambassadors here, and there's an example of how that was done at the London Olympics. Clean stations, so there's a sort of a sanitation point. Again, that's both functional, but also to assure people that measures are in place to preserve public safety. The parking I've talked about, and then other ideas then to sort of create that welcoming atmosphere. So it might be temporary landscapes or art installations. So this is a specific look at Queen Street and how that segregation might work. So it's basically adapting the space that we've got. So you can see there's a one-way system in each direction. There's a queuing zone outside the actual retail premises, and then a buffer to ensure that, you know, you don't have people passing too closely. And then a central strip, which can be used for multiple things. It could be, as we talked about, temporary landscape. In some instances, there may be spill-out spaces for cafes with requisite sort of distancing in place, or signage. So very, very quick sketch idea of what that might look like, and you can start to see that across the street. So if I just move on to, this is again how the leapfrog points might work themselves. So this is picking up Queen Street again. So you can see that there's a point for you to allow to turn around and keep that flow going. So St Mary Street, again, similar pattern of ideas, where you've got that segregation of one-way routes, buffer zones in place, and then reutilising the space in the middle for other uses. On the lower end of St Mary Street, obviously, we'd still need to preserve bus access. And a quick high-level idea of what it might mean, for example, on the Hayes. So as I go through these slides, the colours don't indicate us spraying things on the ground, just to be clear. It's just to, for the purpose of illustration, to demarcate how things may change. So you can start to see, hopefully it's relatively self-explanatory, how the street structure might start to adapt. And I'll finish on this one. So this is just showing again that there's likely to be a series or sort of stages really. So there's what we need to do now, which is ostensibly emergency measures to get the city up and running, get it functioning, make sure it's welcoming and safe. But there will over time be a gradual shift, we hope, as you know, coming back to that earlier vision where we start to see a series of changes come into place, and we go through sort of the aftermath stage into recovery and then this future state. Okay, right. So as I said, that was quite a quick run through. I'm sure that there are a huge amount of questions and queries that people have got. So I think, Adrian, if we just hand back to you, if that's okay, and then we'll take questions.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks for that. Appreciate the speed that we've gone through. That's a bit to take in. If people want to use the chat function, they can do. That's fine. We've had one from Hugh Llewellyn, Hugh's from Admiral Facilities there, asking if he can have a copy of the presentation. What's the gig with that? Ben or Jamie?
Yeah, I think that's one for I think the Chris Hansen and the council just to check which that they'd be happy to release. I think obviously these are under development, so I think we just need to check if they're happy for this version or a slightly later version to be released.
Okay, we'll get clarification on that, but obviously, I think a lot of people will be interested in that, Hugh. So yeah, so that's obviously looking at the public realm. This is one of 3 sessions that we're doing. So we're looking at the professional services sector, the education as well, and I think it's just trying to make sure that what's being suggested here, what the impact on yourselves would be. So the things to maybe think about, or you already thought about, is about travelling to work. Whether you as facilities managers have looked at whether changing opening hours, bike storage, for example. We noticed in the presentation there's more safe parking for bikes. Do we encourage people, perhaps for their mental health, to go to the green spaces in their lunch breaks, that kind of thing, really? So I want to just open it up to everybody else, really, so the businesses who are in on the call, really, what the impact of, we talked about smoking areas, for example, the opening times, how, whether you've done surveys that sort of give you an idea on how many people are likely to come back at any one time.
Adrian, should I take the question? The question that was in the IM, should I take those now or later? Do you prefer?
Yeah. So yeah, we've done Hughes. Judith asked, do we know what plans are in place for public transport? Are ARUP and the council working with Transport for Wales and Cardiff Bus?
Just to say that we are collaborating with Transport for Wales and Cardiff Bus in terms of what the plans are for public transport. I think TFW are just working through how some of these stations will operate most effectively in order to provide, again, that safe environment. There is some guidance that's coming out online, and I think what we're doing is we're making sure that the public realm reflects that response. So there are some ideas around Cardiff Central and Queen Street about making sure there's that maybe additional space for people to walk in those areas, and we're quite lucky that in Cardiff Central we've got that public realm area to utilise, and we'll be looking to put some plans in place.
Okay, and then Carolyn, who's a colleague at 4 Cardiff, what do sanitation points look like? How many will there be, and how will they be managed?
So I think the idea that we've seen so far that will working most effectively is the hands-free sort of sanitation points. We've also seen some examples of people who are in fully sort of PPE, providing sort of cleaning and supervision of those sort of welcoming points, just so that people can use that sanitation. It's foot operated. We are developing it's like a visual for that concept, and in terms of management, I think that we're working with the council to see who would be the right people to manage that. Okay.
Guys, over to you. I don't know whether Suzanne, Judith, Hugh, you've got any sort of thoughts, comments, ideas, challenges that you're facing that would be useful for ARUP and the council to know about?
Sorry, I guess for me it's more to do with getting people into Cardiff. So we've got a couple of spaces in our car park, and I noticed NCP sent me something about a reduced parking fee. I know that we've got lots of people that are concerned about getting public transport to start with, and I don't know, I had the news on this morning and seeing London with people on buses and tubes and things just felt a little bit scary to me. So for me, it's getting people in. I know we've been looking at our plans for getting people back in, and I'm part of a group with UK Finance, with a lot of the big banks, and obviously they work in different areas in the world, and nobody seems to really know the right answer. I think they're sort of planning 10% staff to start with going back. and then just see how it goes, basically.
Could I thank Judith? Could I just share a couple of points on that? I think we're all, including our, and obviously the council and others, they're wrestling with that same challenge. And so Cardiff, I think, does have a few opportunities and strengths which are going to take advantage of here. And part of that is it does have the basis of a cycling network that it can utilise. And part of the plan, if you like, to help feed into that city centre is to bring forward a couple of ideas around temporary cycle. So that would be using our advantages around the Taft Trail, some of the areas that come in from the north, past University, past Civic Centre area. So there are some measures that are coming forward. So I think it is a number of measures. So for car parks, I think are rightly considering the restriction and how they would operate. But in doing so, Cardiff had a fantastic surface car park asset. And one of the ideas we're just trying to work through is that some of that is obviously within immediate public control with the Cardiff Council, but there are some surface car parks that we're talking to partners and organisations around as to whether they could be used. We call them park and strides. So you park and you might walk that distance in, and different people have different tolerances. So we're trying to sort of work across those so that we can create that safe feeling for the individual concerned.
But Ben, can I just to add to that as well, I think this is going to be a live project for a period of time, so it is going to have to adapt and change. So I don't think anybody's under any illusions that we're going to be able to design something now that is a fixed state for a period of time. It is going to adapt, and as you all will have noticed, guidance is changing on a sort of daily or weekly basis. We're engaged now with Public Health Wales, so there's a clear sort of conduit from what is national guidance through to what's happening on the ground. So what we've been very careful to do with this is ensure that this has all got inherent flexibility within it. So if it needs to change at short notice, it can.
Okay, Hugh, are you doing any, or have you done any surveys in terms of where your staff come from? Are you looking at changing working patterns to perhaps ease the pressure and what might be perceived as a rush hour between 8 and 9 o'clock in the morning, for example?
Managed to move house just before all this happened, so I'm running on minimal furniture. So I'm running this from my side. Because I've been working with various marketing roles past 7 years. I currently work for a company called Water Logic, which is a quite big multinational water sport company, which is the sexiest things. But I work within the marketing.
I think Adrian Hugh said he was going to have to sort of slightly step out of the meeting for a little while, didn't he?
Okay, right. Okay, Suzanne, from your point of view, Development Bank of Wales, have you sort of made any plans or surveys regarding your staff and whether they're likely to change their mode of travel or the working day? Does that become?
Yeah, we haven't really. We've put out a survey just kind of testing people's comfort of coming back into the office, how they're managing at home. Our whole workforce is working from home. We literally have one person going into the office just to open post, which is quite a necessary function. But other than that, literally everybody's working from home. And the general feedback is people want to continue working from home as long as possible, assuming the schools go back, because obviously we've got a large proportion of our workforce, they have children. So people are happy to continue working at home as long as their children aren't there, so it seems. So our longer term plans are, if people feel are able to and willing to, they are happy to. We're happy for them to continue working from home and for as long as necessary. So we haven't really tackled it's on my mind thinking about transporting and when people do start coming back in, how does that work? We do have parking available for a large number of our staff, but we do have a certain proportion of the staff who do take public transport. But early indications show that people are really quite happy where they are right now, and as a business we're managing to function that way and actually really seeing some benefits from it. So it's kind of a bit of a waiting game really as to how quickly people do want to start getting back into the office. I think even if there was an announcement, you know, in the next month or two saying, right, you can all go back, I think there would be some hesitance from our workforce to do that.
So would you welcome the, one of the things that we're looking at for Cardiff is perhaps looking at a repository of information so that businesses can share risk assessments, checklists for, reopening, that kind of thing. So that
absolutely. That would, I think,
keep everybody writing stuff when actually there's a template that's good that can be used by a load of different businesses and tailor it a little bit to themselves.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That would be really useful. And I think from the survey we did carry out, the main concern for the individuals isn't necessarily their transport or travel to the office. It's once they're in the office. I think that's where we're seeing the greatest concern. So, any information we can share on how, people are managing that, or, ideas about how you facilitate that in obviously a building that isn't purpose built for one-way directing of traffic within the workplace. We're in a multi-tenanted building, so we have to work quite closely with landlords over the ingress and egress of the building and how all that works in conjunction with the other companies in there. We're three very different businesses within the building. I'm not that common sense wouldn't prevail amongst all those businesses, but we do have, we've already previously we've seen very different approaches for how the management want to pursue things. So it's just finding that balance between businesses that we're working very closely with in the building, landlords, and how we all pull together to provide that a level of comfort to our workforce when they do want to start coming back in.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. Chris, Ben, Jamie, in terms of ARUP as a company themselves, have you got any sort of advice or places where businesses can go to sort of glean more information, things they need to think about when staff begin to return to work at all, how to deal with toilets, communal areas, kitchens, smoking areas, bike storage, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's just on the latter point. I think Emily asked a question in the IM that I responded to on the cycle parking. The council is looking at some additional areas to provide sort of temporary cycling that might allow more people to come by that mode. Just in terms of internal areas and how they operate, accept the point that was made by Suzanne. I think that was, it is a difficult area to manage. There is some help in terms of understanding how busy a space can get. There is some sort of modelling software that will look at sort of proximity analysis, and I think part of it comes down to, if there's a busy area, that works, and a part of it does come down to people's behaviours and encouraging that positive behaviour. So what I would do is, if there is anything that we can send through, Adrian, I'll drop it in specifically, and perhaps you could share around the group. Yeah,
that'd be great. Yeah, no problem at all. Julie just offered some risk assessments that they have optimum credit in terms of within the banking industry. So yeah, any templates that people have got that they're happy to share, we're more than happy to sort of set this sort of library up, I guess, for other businesses to use, because I think in essence we're all in this together, keen to share best practice, good ideas, but also challenges. So if people genuinely have got problems, others may have solved that. So I see this as an opportunity for businesses to work together and help each other out on this one. Another question, PPE has been a large discussion. Do you provide masks and gloves to your staff to commute or wear in the offices on their return? Is that yours, Judith?
Yep, yeah, that's mine. That's been a big discussion for us, and a big discussion for the banks as well, because obviously they've got thousands of staff, and they're just discussing about procuring large amounts, and they don't want to take away PPE from the NHS. Do you just have PPE for staff that are commuting on public transport, and then it's the whole, when they come into the office, how do you dispose of that? Do they need to have fresh stuff when they come in? I guess it's just finding out what your staff feel comfortable with. I know I was reading the government guidelines on the risk, doing the risk assessment, and it says that you need to basically involve staff in the risk assessment. So the people that are coming into the office need to discuss with you, how do they feel, I guess, to see, are they happy coming in with no PPE? Do they expect us to be providing them with stuff if they're in the kitchens? And, are we having a full-time cleaner wiping touch points constantly throughout the day? It's just like a can of worms, really, if you stop thinking about it.
I'm happy to kind of tell people what we're doing at Admiral, if you like, with regards to those areas.
Thank you.
When we're not encouraging people to use public transport in the first wave of people coming back to the office. We're targeting people who can walk or drive to work before we encourage people to use public transport, because we want to see what happens when public transport gets used. So from a risk assessment process, and we've deemed that the risk of public transport is too great to ask our staff, to their safety, for them to come to work using public transport and then to come into the office. So we're encouraging people who walk or cycle or who use the car. For those people who come into the office, we are going to have PPE which is basically there for them to use if they want it, rather than us mandate that they've got to use it in the office. Because we think there's a litigious position if you mandate that people have got to use PPE in the office. So the other side of that is the sanitisation stations, and then also the cleaning regime, and then how we enforce the social distancing in the office. So we're just completing the signage and the separation of the lifts and communal areas, the communal meeting points, car parks, receptions, all those type areas. And then we're moving on to the floors where we've already space planned how people will socially distance at 2 meters. And that fits into our framework of bringing people back into the office, obviously in line with the government regulations first, and then what public transport and schools are open. But the main point there is really how we ramp up bringing people back into the office. Is a test and learn scenario, really, where we bring back maybe 10%, and then we test and learn from the 3 or 4 weeks that we have 10% back, and then we redo the risk assessment, and we consult with the staff on how they found 10% of people being in the office. Have they seen any incidents of social distancing not being maintained, or the cleaning regimes falling below the standards they expect, or caused any uncertainty for them? Because I think, as I think it was Ruth who said then about consultation with staff, and we're producing a framework, and then a risk assessment, and then like an action plan, which we are then going to share and consult with the staff before we bring anybody back. And then before we bring people back, we're going to share that with those people coming back, and then get them to sign up to some sort of pledge or duty of care to each other. So reporting on anything that they see they're concerned about, and also then reporting on any illnesses and things like that.
Then I know we've spoken separately about sort of a checklist as well that you've produced. Do you want to talk briefly about that?
Yeah, so we've been working. Our portfolio is wide, it's international. So we've been working with our businesses in Italy, France, Spain, India, and Canada on what different countries are doing. So our checklist is very broad, and it covers off the usual health and safety areas, plus M&E, plus facilities management, plus some comms areas as well, of the things that we're doing to the offices in the meantime, because we've closed all of the offices to staff, but we've kept the offices open for critical staff, and obviously for cleaning and security, where we've gone through a huge regime at the moment. So we're keeping M&E services running, so so we don't get into problems like Legionella and stuff like that. But we're developing that tick list for use at all of our sites, and satisfying that tick list or that matrix is going to deem whether we open those sites or not. So the sites we're opening first are the ones that we've got complete control over of. So that's the building in Newport with 1,000 people, T Admiral in Cardiff, which is about 3,000 people, plus then 2 sites in Swansea with about another 2,000 people in. So we're looking at those sites first. One of the areas that does concern me are the managing agent managed sites where you've got multiple tenants and it's not clear what other tenants are doing. And that's a serious risk for us as a business right now, because there's no visibility about what those other tenants are doing or how they're going to manage the services or their people. And also the same applies to the managing agents as well, and the landlords. Some of them haven't been very forthcoming in what they're going to do, but they're very keen to know what we're doing.
I think that'll be a challenge in quite a few of the buildings in Cardiff. I know, is that something you mentioned, Suzanne, as well? We've got Bruno House, a load of smaller businesses there, and then the whole issue of lifts and staircases and access as well. So anyone, in terms of the arrival points into whether it's the university route or the offices themselves, have you got any sort of plans that ARUP can bear in mind, given sort of the plans here? Sort of talked about, does a designated smoking area, do you need to make plans for that take into account some of the plans that we've got here? Admiral, the main building by the motor point, is open to the public at the front, isn't it? Reception area. How people are managing that, and what are there any takeaways for ARUP to bear in mind in their report?
I think from the university's perspective, at this point, we're on total shutdown. So the only occupants of our buildings are security.
Ruth from University of South Wales.
Sorry, yeah, University of South Wales. So from our perspective, we're in total shutdown. And I suppose because we are going to stay in that way until later in the year, we know that we're not going to be back in any shape or form until September, and the likelihood is that even in September, most institutions will be delivering remotely with a much reduced student body, if at all, until January. Then our planning, therefore, lots of the conversation that's happened so far is all quite familiar. I think listening to Hugh about where Admiral are, they are further ahead than probably the university sector in their planning, because our timescales are slightly different, and we can push things back a little bit. So it's really helpful actually to be hearing what everybody else is doing, because some of these considerations we're just starting to work through at this point. In terms of managing the building itself, the conversations that we are having at this point are all working through the kind of granular detail that everybody else is about how you socially distance, and certainly for us with 3,000 students in a single build with multiple entrances, it will be things like just only having one entrance in, one entrance out, only having students back that need access to specialist kit to complete their studies. And I know that's quite common across all institutions at the minute. So I guess we are catching up in the planning, really, in summary. At this point, we're not quite advanced.
So Ruth, you'd appreciate any sort of templates that other businesses might have put together?
Yeah, okay. That'd be really, really good. I'm not happy to share whatever we put together as well.
Yeah, good. Okay. Sorry. Sorry. Yeah, Judith just mentioned in the chat, we're in a shared building and there are socially distancing signs up in regards to smoking. And already I do not see people following these rules. I think there's a challenge there, and I think that's one that will crop up throughout the city centre. Ken Paul's joined us. Ken's the head of economic development. I don't know whether you want to elaborate on this at all, Ken, but you've suggested it'd be good to get a view from businesses on this call if there are any city centre interventions and businesses would like to see introduced to support them in terms of adapting to the changing business environment and to help businesses to remain operational. Has anybody got any views on that? Or Ken, do you want to sort of elaborate on that at all?
I've got a really quick view, Adrian. And my main concern right now is those communal points where people are coming into the city. So public transport is obviously key because the city depends on public transport, and the ongoing strategy is all about how we utilise public transport and less cars to get into the city. So public transport and the strategies around that are absolutely key, but also those main arteries where people are departing public transport or car parks, how those are going to be manned and policed, I think, is key to keeping people separate and containing any outbreaks of the virus.
Yeah. Adrian, thanks for the opportunity. I guess this is a great forum, you know, to pick the brains of businesses who are going to be impacted, you know, by the city centre and by the economy changes. So while obviously this is a physical plan, you know, I'm also interested to get their views on a range of interventions, both physical and other, that may complement this plan, you know, and the sort of topics that we're feeding in or will be feeding into this include, for example, the use of public space, how that can be enhanced, potential of you know, flexible licensing arrangements, shared covered areas, for example, issues about extending operating hours. What about pop-up space? Could that be utilised? More coordination, etc. So I think it's a great opportunity to comment on the proposals, but also to put businesses' proposals forward as well, and not just concentrate on pure physical matters, but also other operational matters that they feel can make the city centre a continuing place to visit, assist in the operational issues of business as well being impacted, and bring more people in. So, you know, we would welcome as many comments as possible, and you know, feel free to be as imaginative and as bold as possible, because we are in challenging times, and we do need some, you know, stimulating and new ways of enhancing the viability of the city centre.
That's Ken. Yeah, it's about reassurance, isn't it? Making sure that, you know, the economy stands up, you know, so that workers come into an environment that they feel safe, secure. They can, you know, they can go for lunch and not worry too much. You know, support, you know, that the hospitality industry after work, that kind of thing as well. So, anybody got any thoughts on what Ken's just said?
Ken, it's Q here, mate. What are the council considering anything at the moment? Is there anything that they've got planned which we should know about? I mean, what about en masse sanitisation centres, or, you know, kind of some sort of screening as people coming off? Are we doing any sort of thermal screening as people are departing public transport, or, you know, are we going to do any ad hoc thermal screening of people or things like that, so we can, or any support of the NHS app and how people are tracking, you know, potential people who've been in contact with people at the council, doing anything on those fronts?
There's a lot of activity on this front, and some of it is outside, not on my radar screen at the moment. But there's a hell of a lot of activity taking place, not just within the council, but within all the various agencies as well. And I think I know, for example, that the leader is intending to have soon an interaction webinar or similar to talk through with business, okay, some of these issues, but also get direct feedback from those businesses as well. And I think that you should be hearing a little bit more about that, you know, very shortly. But I guess the other suggestion I would say, if there are specific issues that the businesses have, if they want to drop them to me, I'm very happy, or to Adrian, very happy to be a collecting box and obviously gain the most recent insights and developments on those particular issues and feedback where possible, or similarly put you in contact with the individual or groups who are specifically involved with looking at those issues or implementing those issues. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Ken. My other question is really around, are the council going to release, when the time is right and when local government says that people should be going back to work and public transport is a bit safer, is the council going to release some sort of strategy document for the city, which will demonstrate some of the measures that are in place and the impact they expect it to have? And the reason why I ask that is more as a comms piece and to put some confidence into people who are coming into the city centre, that they can see that, because that is going to help bring people back in when the time is right, that they've got that confidence.
Yes, it's all about existing and also bouncing back as well.
Yeah. Okay.
And those measures are in place moving forward. You will businesses, the residents, communities of the city will be actively engaged and informed of those, the processes. In fact, I was on a call. I was late arriving today because we're working through some of those plans in terms of how does the city bounce back, and there will be opportunities, for you to get engaged with those processes. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Ken.
Can I just ask, with sort of like the 2 metre spacing outside of businesses for queuing, essentially, how or will that be managed if people or when people go against it? Because I think on the whole you can trust most people, but there'll be quite a niche bunch who won't, and I think and how will that be managed?
Yeah, I'll probably provide. Hi, Karen. I'll just probably provide a couple of comments on that, and it is something that we're just trying to work through. And there was a question earlier which actually said there were some social distancing signs up when people weren't following them. But what we find from a psychology perspective is that, say, an environment, as you can see on the shared screen, if there was no one in that space at all, then people would tend to perhaps just meander through in whichever way they want. As the city gets a little bit busier, I think people start to conform to social norms or what's expected of them. And I think that's what we're trying to get is that sort of safe behaviour and that community oversight and that social oversight. The specific point around queuing and if people don't adhere to it, agents helpfully set up some discussion with retail, hospitality, and we're just trying to work that through. There's some different ideas in different locations about who might be responsible and how that would be put together. So I think it's a test and learn, I think, with the phrase used earlier. That's one area we're learning from globally. We're just taking some of the ideas. Some parts of the globe very rigid and they almost police it, and other parts of the globe we're seeing people respond to, if you like, the social norms and the expectation. That said, there will be people who in every walk of life will go against that grain, and we need to be aware of that and manage that, I think, from a comms perspective, but also from a feeling safe perspective.
Yeah, I think, and just one other thing as well, maybe to add to that. So there's within the scope of what we can do, and that's we as ARUP and the council. Obviously, we can put forward ideas for the public spaces. One of the unknowns at the moment is, for example, how internal retail floor space is managed. So, from a practical point of view, there is a limit to how much queuing space you can provide outside a shop. And as Ben's touched on, those conversations are in the pipeline to be had with the retail operators to understand whether they're actually planning, for example, to reassess the internal floor plans to provide more queuing space within the shop.
Hugh's flagged up on the chat. The council should consider the document to be in 2 stages: health and safety, stroke protection of workers and visitors to the city in the first phase. Second phase should be focused on the bounce back when there's confidence in the systems and processes in place. I don't know whether anybody from perhaps the project team within the council, we've got a couple of people involved there, Simon and Jason, or whether Jamie, Ben from ARUP wanted to sort of come back on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that initially. So I think we alluded to it in the presentation. I think that is part of the scope at the moment. So, you know, if you looked at it in terms of priorities, clearly public health is number one. The focus right now is very much on delivering that and allowing the city to function, as we said, but still maintaining that welcoming strategy. The reason we sort of touched on in one of the slides, future stages, was exactly to that point. So I think there are naturally certain phases for this. The initial focus is very much on what you talked about in terms of getting workers back in, certain numbers of visitors. There's a finite resource generally, so that's why energy needs to be focused on that, but we're not losing sight of the next stage of work, and that will naturally follow as this process evolves.
Okay. Jason, Simon, is there anything from the council's point of view you wanted to add to that? Okay.
Sorry, I was just going to add that I think a lot of how we adapt will be from some of the things that come from some of those businesses during these chats, that to give us a better understanding of how each of the businesses want to and are proposing to move forward, so that we can take those ideas on and work with ARUP then to try to put as much as possible in place in a safe manner. So I think, depending on what comes from some of these discussions and better understanding from the businesses, will help us to develop that as part of this scheme.
Thanks, Simon. Is there any timing around that? I mean, I think it's fair to say that we could be bringing people back into the city centre in 3 weeks in some way. So is there any timing to that document being shared? Or any time being shared?
I think ARUP will maybe be able to answer a bit more on timescale.
Because one of the things we want to do is we're bringing 4,500 people into the city centre potentially, obviously when we're at 100%. But even at 10%, it's 450 people. And really, we want to say not just what we're doing, but what the city centre's doing as well, to give them confidence and comfort when they come in.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I'm one part of multiple people and multiple departments within the council. Yeah. And we're all working in our own individual areas to try and feed in as part of this major scheme with ARUP, to try and put something in place as a whole. So to give an individual timescale from the question you're asking, I can't give that specific answer. It's when we can get something more from this scheme. ARUP might be able to give a bit more timescale, I'm not sure.
Okay, so it's probably one for ARUP to answer, yeah?
I would say so,
Ben,
yeah.
Ben, Jamie, have you got any?
I just say, in terms of the important part, I think you talked about phases earlier, is that the initial approach is something that we need to move on quickly, as and when the advice starts to bring the city back to life in its different phases and its different ways. So a lot of the measures proposed are very sort of quick to install. And I know the council, are looking at the time frame, looking at the supplies and making sure that they're ready, and they're opening up that pipeline to make sure that when there's approval from the council, that they would go ahead with that. I, in terms of advice about, there obviously are some people in the city centre and that's being managed, but as when that ramps up, I think we're just waiting for that advice, but we're trying to be ready for when that advice comes. We don't yet know if that will be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, but we're trying to work within those sort of timeframes to be ready to start to implement. And I think we're all in a very similar position, because there are some mixed messages, but there are some also clear guidance, and we're waiting for that clear guidance from obviously Welsh Government and also from Public Health Wales, that have informed this decision making. But a lot of the measures are supposed to be ready quickly. They are to be in that space. So I know it doesn't answer a specific time frame, but just to say we are very.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the answer. I'm just making sure that we align things with businesses so we can get people comfortable rather than, you know, the flag going up and then having a job of actually doing a comms piece with the people so we can get them aware of what to expect when they come into the city, and then what they can expect when they come into the buildings and the rest of the environment as well. So it's, like I said, it's a comms piece, but understanding, even having something in draft is going to be useful for when finally they say that we can start bringing some people back in.
Yeah, I think that's true. Obviously the City Council were working towards an overall comms initiative to cover the whole city, and I think basically it sort of started last week with the bits of information about the district centres and some of the 20-mile-an-hour zones that might be going in across the city as a whole. And we're now obviously trying to work with groups like yourselves to make sure that we dovetail together, that we're doing the same, we're doing something that fits with yourselves and with TFW to make sure the railway stations are operational as well. So, and there are bits and pieces happening within the next week or so in some of the one or two district centres, and Castle Street and potentially Wood Street as well, as very first initiatives, and then the rest of it we're hoping to follow very quickly when we've got an approved set of measures agreed with yourselves and ARUP, obviously pulling things together on our behalf.
I think that's great and it's really helpful. I just think getting that information out there to the general public and to the workers of the city, because the workers of the city need to be looked after first and foremost before we start bringing the public, is going to help bring people in quicker. So the overall plan is to, I forget the terminology that Ken used, but to get the people back in the city centre, or that the health and safety of the workers first and foremost before, because that's your test, isn't it? If you can test it with the workers and the people who work in the city, then you can start getting general public into the city as well.
That's right. No, I agree with you. I mean, obviously the workers will be coming in potentially earlier because the rest of the public will be a little bit more nervous about mingling, won't they? Once we've shown the city works again, and it's a safe place, that will make a big difference.
Yeah, and the commuter hours are probably the busiest times of the day anyway in the city. So
yes, and I suppose the other thing to work with people like yourselves is ways of staggering the arrival times more than we already stagger them.
Yeah, that might help with the public transport, although the public transport is very limited in its operating hours, isn't it? So
it is. I mean, it's another set of discussions. We need to make sure that us and TFW and the bus companies are on the same page over this, and I guess delivery to the city centre as well.
Yeah, Naz and Judith, just on that, is your organisation looking at changing the hours that your teams would work at all, just to perhaps dilute the pressure on sort of the rush hour, I suppose?
We haven't discussed that yet. We're not that far ahead. At the moment, we're sort of still thinking we're going to keep people home as long as possible. But I guess it probably will be something. I think what Hugh said about just bringing 10% back to start and see how it goes. And it's just going to be a learning process.
Okay, Naz?
Hi all. Yeah. It's something that we have been thinking about, and very similar in the respect of we don't know what's going on, but we are thinking about a skeleton staff. So we've got 44 employees, so we're thinking about 20 come in on a part-time basis and come in on alternative days. But like we said, we're just still up in the air at the moment. Okay,
so from an ARUP point of view, is it worth, and maybe for Cardiff the best place to do this, to perhaps survey businesses just to get a bit of a feel for what their intentions are about their employees returning to work, the mode of transport, any tweaks to the times that they work? That might be the same for retail as well. I know there's been a bit of chat nationally about extending retail trading hours, Sunday trading hours, for example, just to help everybody and sort of stretch things out a bit, really.
I think that would be incredibly useful.
Okay, is that something that maybe we can have a chat separately about? And
yeah, absolutely, that'd be so helpful. Yeah.
Just out of interest on the topic of people sort of returning to the office, and I suppose something for this survey that you've just suggested, Adrian, how are people feeling about sort of into the future, like when we're talking like after a vaccine, like sort of back to a relative normality? Are people feeling that their whole workforce is going to come back to the office, or do you think you've gone through sort of a fundamental shift now and it's never going to go back to everyone in every day?
I think it's going to change dramatically. I think it's going to be a new way of working. I don't think people will be working in the office 9 to 5 like they used to, personally.
Yeah, I absolutely agree on that. I think we've got to create a new normal now, and that's just going to adjust as we go along. I don't think that it will be back to full days and full hours. I know for us, we have been thinking about working from home as a constant now. So I don't know. It's all about just adjusting to what's out there and what's been told to us to do, really.
Yeah. It's interesting from a sort of a full Cardiff perspective. Obviously, as people are working less in the city, I think like ARUP were alluding to at the beginning of the presentation, it just changes the whole way a city functions. And I think we're going to have sped up through that process because of this. It's just interesting to consider.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of businesses rely on the number of workers that come into the city centre. So the knock-on effect there is going to be could be quite profound, really. Just conscious of time, has anybody got anything else they want to sort of flag up, challenges that they're facing, ideas they've got, just before we sort of finish off? Excellent, we've covered everything. I think if people want to benefit, if it's a benefit to you guys, are you happy if people wanted to submit any sort of thoughts or comments to yourself directly outside this session?
Yeah, I think that would be useful. Are you able to share, or possibly maybe you've already shared my email and Chris Hampton's email? And that we'd be happy. We'll distribute it amongst the team if one or other of us gets it. Thank you. Okay,
yeah, we'll do that as a follow-up. I think one of the things I'd like to do is perhaps share some of the there's a new guidance. It's for England only at the moment. I don't think it changes things really. The guidance on the management of public places. There's a lot of information that's coming out all the time, and if we can promote the fact that For Cardiff will set up this repository of information, risk assessments, checklists, and get as many businesses to put into that as possible, I think that would be useful. So great. Well, thank you everybody for your time. I don't know, Ben, is there anything you want to summarise, or Chris or Jamie at all?
Just to say thank you, really appreciate it, and please do keep ideas and share that across to the council. That'd be really appreciated.
Great, no problem. Just to let everybody know, we've got 2 other sessions today, one for hospitality, one for retail. If there's a desire, I suppose, from those in the professional services sector to maybe do these on a more regular basis, not necessarily with ARUP, but just to share ideas and just connect with each other, more than happy to facilitate that. That's no problem. So yeah, any feedback will be appreciated. But other than that, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.